Good evening. Welcome to our second member-exclusive virtual art talk featuring Larger Than Memory artists. My name is Allison Lester. I am the Associate Director of Visitor and Member Engagement, also known as the one you get your member newsletters from. I'm coming to you live from the Heard Museum. The Heard Museum sits on the traditional homelands of the Akmil Atam and the Halchidam Pipash people. Today, they are our neighbors, friends, and partners. I also want to share that for the first time ever, the state of Arizona has recognized today as Indigenous Peoples Day. In September, we were proud to host our friends from a youth-led advocacy group, Indigenous Peoples Day Initiative, and several tribal leaders from across the state, where we officially announced Governor Doug Ducey's proclamation. And then this past Saturday, we hosted our Indigenous Peoples celebration. We had several events throughout the day that were streamed to our Facebook and Instagram pages. If you were not able to catch them live, those videos are available for you to view at your convenience. So I did want to take a moment and say thank you all for tuning in. I can't tell you enough how much we appreciate your support of the Heard Museum, especially now when we aren't able to gather in person like we used to. We've created these programs just for you, our members, as a way to bring you closer to our exhibitions and to learn more about the amazing and dynamic artists featured in Larger Than Memory. Of course, the best way to understand the exhibition is to come see it in person. We are open every Tuesday through Sunday with an extensive set of safety protocols in place, including required masks for all staff and visitors, hand sanitizing stations throughout the museum, directional arrows in the galleries, and reduced hourly attendance to no more than 100 visitors per hour. Now, I'm going to go over the event logistics briefly. I'm sure that most of you have attended a Zoom lecture or meeting by now. Today's event is a webinar, which means you will only see and hear from our panelists. The chat box is open. We encourage you to talk with each other and make sure you just select everyone, all attendees and panelists, if you would like your comments to be seen by more than just me or one of the panelists. And you'll be able to ask the artist questions at the end of this discussion. If you have any technical difficulties, you can call the membership helpline. That number is listed in the first comment in the chat. We will also have a brief survey for you at the conclusion of the event, so please take a moment to let us know what you thought and your suggestions for future events. Before I introduce the panel, I do have a couple quick questions for you. I'm going to send out a poll that will pop up on your screen. All you need to do is just click on your answer. First question. How many of you attended the virtual art talk when Larger Than Memory opened on September 4th? Did you attend? Did you not attend? Second question, have you seen Larger Than Memory in person? Just hit that button, yes or no. And then finally, who is ready to hear from our panelists? I'll give you a moment to just submit those. All right, great. And also a reminder that, we do have our early access hours for members on Saturdays or Sundays. So if you come at 9 a.m., you will probably be the only one in the museum, or at least one of 5. If you're still not able to visit or just not able to come in, we completely understand, and we will continue to offer these virtual programs so that you can continue enjoying the exhibition from the comfort of your own home. So this evening, our panel is moderated by Erin Joyce, Heard Museum Fine Art Curator and Larger Than Memory Exhibition Co-Curator, along with Diana Perdue, who is participating as an attendee, so feel free to say hi to her in the comments. If you don't already know Erin, during her time at the Heard, she has organized and co-organized 8 original exhibitions, including Still Life No. 3, Raven Chacon, Maria Hupfield, 9 Years Towards the Sun, which still is on view, and David Hockney's Yosemite and Masters of California Basketry, along with our Director of Research, Ann Marshall, who I also believe is an attendee, so definitely give them both a little hello there. Yep, we'll go ahead and also share those results of the panel right now. So first, you'll hear from Luz de Soto, who is a Kuya multidisciplinary artist living and working in Napa, California. His work is included in major museums as well as corporate and private collections. De Soto's practice includes photography, sound installations, sculpture, as well as work with customized cars as sculptural objects. He became interested in photography and automobiles as a child, noting that some of the first photographs he took when he was 10 years old were of model cars. DeSoto holds an MFA from Claremont Graduate School and a Bachelor's of Arts in Studio Art with a specialized study in Buddhist religion from the University of California, Riverside. He has had solo exhibitions at the Santa Barbara Museum of Art, Harn Museum of Art at the University of Florida, and the Museum of Contemporary Art San Diego. Additionally, his work has been featured at the Site Santa Fe Biennial, Wave Hill in the Bronx, New York, and the San Antonio Museum of Art. We'll then hear from Cara Romero, who is a Chumueve contemporary fine art photographer raised between contrasting settings, the rural Chumueve Reservation in Mojave Desert, California, and the urban sprawl of Houston, Texas. Romero's identity informs her photography, a blend of fine art and editorial photography shaped by years of study and a visceral approach to representing Indigenous and non-Indigenous cultural memory, collective history, and lived experiences from a Native American female perspective. As an undergraduate at the University of Houston, Romero pursued a degree in cultural anthropology. Disillusioned by academic and media portrayals of Native Americans as bygone, Romero realized that making photographs could do more than anthropology in words, a realization that led to a shift in medium. Since 1998, Romero's expansive oeuvre has been informed by formal training in film, digital, fine art, and commercial photography. By staging theatrical compositions infused with dramatic color, Romero takes on the role of storyteller using contemporary photography techniques to depict the modernity of Native peoples, illuminating Indigenous worldviews and aspects of supernaturalism in everyday life. Maintaining a studio in Santa Fe, Romero regularly participates in Native American art fairs and panel discussions and was featured in PBS's Craft in America in 2019. Her award-winning work is included in many public and private collections internationally. And finally, you'll hear from Mike Patton, who is a Zagame Anishinaabeg contemporary visual artist based in Montreal and a member of the Zagame Anishinaabeg First Nation in Saskatchewan. He holds a Bachelor's of Fine Arts in Painting and a Bachelor's of Fine Art in Drawing with a minor in Art History from the University of Regina and has participated in solo and group exhibitions internationally and nationally in museums, artist-run centers, commercial spaces, and university galleries. In 2017, he was one of the laureates for the, I'm gonna butcher this, Hinyastian Foundation's Reveal Indigenous Art Awards. Patton is presently the director of the Contemporary Native Art Biennial in Montreal, a nonprofit organization with a mandate to recognize and support contemporary Indigenous art and artists. So now I'm going to give it over to Aaron and Louis DeSoto, who will begin the overview of each artist's work, followed by a discussion with all three artists, at the very end of which we'll open it up to you to submit your questions. You can either submit it through the Q&A or the comments. I'll be monitoring both. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Aaron, and we'll see everyone in the Q&A.
Thank you, Allison, and thank you to everybody watching from home. And I'd also like to thank all of our panelists for being here and taking the time out of their busy schedules to share a little bit more about their practice. So what we're going to do now is we're going to let Louis discuss his practice in a little bit more depth. He's sent us a few images, but first, if we could go to the next slide. For those of you who haven't seen the exhibition in person, this is an installation shot where you can see Louis's work on the left of your screen. So Louis, why don't we get started and hear a little bit more about your work?
Sure. Thank you very much for including me in this presentation. Well, let's just take a look at the first slide. And we can come back to this particular piece at the end. What I wanted to do was just go through some kind of major works that relate to some Native American experience in relationship to my own upbringing. My father didn't really talk too much beyond the picnics and family gatherings that we would have in San Bernardino, which was nowhere near the reservation he grew up on, about basically the world of the world and the cosmology of that world that that he grew up in. And it wasn't until I was actually about a teenager that he started wanting me to go with him on these road trips out to Palm Springs, out to Saboba, out to various other places where various things happened to him that were significant that he wanted to share. And when those came along, I realized that I didn't really have a full picture of, and he didn't really either have a full picture of where this world came from. And so I started doing some more academic research. And the first major piece I started was in the mid 80s. But the first installation piece I made about Kauai cosmology was in 1991 with this piece called The Language of Paradise. What you're looking at is a room at the UC Berkeley Art Museum, and you sit at a desk and you look out beyond that desk. You see this basket, which is slowly rotating, kind of like a spiral galaxy. And you're hearing old songs sung, recorded on wax cylinders from the early 1900s. But basically, it tells the story that was recorded by Joe Lomax. Was recorded of Joe Lomax in the 1960s, telling the story of the creation of the universe from the Kauai point of view. And this piece was a sort of cross between not only an installation piece and a sound piece, but also kind of an anthropology library. So let's just go to the next piece. And then I did two pieces called Takwish. Takwish was a name of a demigod in Kauai mythology. And this piece is about two stories told to me by an elder named Alvino Siva. And this particular installation was done in the mid 90s and consisted of two rooms with the sound of Alvino's voice bouncing around the room from speaker to speaker, telling the story in Kauai. And what you're looking at is a detail on the right and a picture of the two rooms on the left, and these very tall cubes of ice, which melted into these pots underneath and made this sort of beautiful dripping sound. But it was about the Takwish who ate spirits, and he consumed the spirits of living beings and basically hid them away in a giant rock, which was up in the mountains above Palm Springs. Can we have the next image? This is a reprise of the whole project called Takwish done at UC Riverside. Oddly, the Museum of Contemporary Art in LA, who owned the piece, were having a number of problems. Let's put it that way, and they were not able to lend Takwish. So I decided to completely redo it and show it in sort of like a different context. So this is a giant stone which is hanging from the ceiling, supposedly where Takwish lived. And then beyond, you can see the basket, which sort of comes back from Language of Paradise. And you hear at various places in the space the sound of Alvino Siva telling the story again, but I added the element of a opera singer who sang the words of Alvino's story about a maiden who's kidnapped by Takwish. In the ceiling, you'll see this gigantic map that was hand-drawn by the US GS Service in the early 20th century, showing the Takwish Peak area near Palm Springs. Let's see the next slide. So started while all of this other stuff was going on with the Takwish project. I also was working on this large pickup truck. And this pickup truck is actually talking about a situation with the Kauai tribe and the US government in the mid 80s, which in 1981, the US government closed down a card room where the Kauai had installed gambling machines. and the Korea government sued the United States. And in 1985, there was a judgment made where tribes were given the authority, sovereign authority to create casinos. So this truck is actually a kind of homage to that whole act, and also to this sort of new fold or new experience of a native person having money. And what would they do with this money? But they would buy a nice big pickup truck. And so what I did is I created my own branded Kauai pickup truck. Installed within it were all these all the symbology, excuse me, that related to money, to gambling, and to sort of traditions of the Kauai people. Can we see the next slide? This is the tonneau cover that goes over the back of the pickup truck, and it contains sort of traditional Kauai symbols, and also a craps table from a casino, and kind of mixes the two together in a woven blanket that hangs over the edge of that. And this whole sculpture is now owned by the Autry Museum. It's going to be part of one of their California Discovery galleries that's going to be opening next year. So let's see, the next slide would probably be, yes, the Skookum. So Skookum dolls were created by a white woman who decided to make these dolls, which were carved somewhat ironically out of dried apples. And she created these sort of shifty-eyed dolls with using bits of blanket to cover them because they didn't really have bodies. And I was thinking about how my own identity, in a sense, was formed by both by white society and by Native American culture, and also felt like there was this cross between or code switching between myself and all of these sorts of ideas about Native Americans. So can we go to the next slide? This is a photograph of a large inflatable sculpture based on myself, with a lot of different kinds of symbols and materials that related to my own life. For instance, I have asthma. You might be able to hear it actually. And so in my right hand is an atomizer with the albuterol in it. And I'm also a photographer, so I'm carrying my camera. And I also did a lot of sound recording and sound work, so I have my tape recorder and my microphone. But mixed in with it are sort of some of the kind of ideas and experiences that go with that. My King Crimson t-shirt, the headband that was created by my aunt. She did a lot of beading. And then I'm standing on this sort of odd tire, which says no such thing as wilderness, which is a reference to the idea that the idea of wilderness eliminates all native peoples from the lands. One of the reasons why there's no native people living in Yosemite anymore. And on the back, you can also see that I'm wearing a blanket, but this is a US Army blanket. And then sort of embossed in that is the smallpox virus, which was used as a biological weapon, first by Amherst and then by the US Army against Native people. I think they're up to the last slide here. So you can kind of see the similarity between these two figures.
Thank you, Louis.
Yeah, sure.
So next we'll be experiencing some of the work of Mike Patton. So if we could go to the next slide really quick. There's an image, again, for those of you who haven't been able to see the exhibition in person, installation shot of 2 of the 3 works by Mike that we have in the exhibition. So I guess we'll just get started and let you speak about the images you've shared, and then we can discuss after we hear from Kara.
Sure. Well, I'd like to say happy Indigenous Peoples Day. And it's a real honor to be in the exhibition. I'd like to thank David Rock, the director, Diana Pardue, Aaron Joyce, the donors, the members, Allison, and the rest of the team. So the very first slide that you saw was a video, an animation of red dots covering my face. So it starts off with 1 and then 2 and then 3, and then it builds up until it completely covers my face. So that piece was really about the commodification of Indigenous culture, land, and how smallpox was used as a weapon against Indigenous people. And also, for the past 17 years, I've worked in a commercial art gallery. So those little red dots, those for sale sign, for sale little dots come up often, and it's just playing off my experience there and my identity. Right next to it is this white headdress. A few years ago, I was invited to present some pieces at the McCord Museum, and they have a vast collection of artifacts, including a headdress and other handmade items. And I was inspired by this headdress, and I was just thinking about how Indigenous values have been whitewashed or commodified and taken over. So I kind of had this idea to take a headdress, but completely douse it in white until it kind of dripping almost like an oil spill. So it's also talking about environmentalism and that what happens there. So the next slide. So this was my experience going to the Ganawagi Reserve near Montreal, where I live. There was a ton of smoke shacks, like where they sell cigarettes, and I was just thinking about the difference between big tobacco and its influence and the importance of tobacco in Indigenous life, and just playing on that. The materials I use are really dependent on what I'm talking about. Like in this piece, they're cigarettes, so I thought it was important to actually make them out of paper and just not real tobacco inside, but that's what that's about. Next slide. So this is another piece that's in the exhibition. It's called Native Beating. This is just 3 views of one piece. So it's a baseball bat covered in red and white seed beads. What you see is the map of Canada, but it's also supposed to represent blood splatter. So I'm just talking about the violence that's happened with colonization. And what else did I want to say about that? That's basically it. About territory, violence. The next slide. So this piece was called The Ups and Downs of European Trade. When I started beading, actually the bat was the first time I had ever done bead work. And then I was at an artist talk talking about the project, and someone brought up, did you know that beads aren't actually native to North America? They were a trade good that came from Europe. And at the time, I didn't know that. I didn't know that they mostly used other materials here. So I was just thinking about commodities that are positive and negative. And I'm thinking about like booze. I mean, alcohol was here and it was present, but not in the same sense where it was mass marketed to people. And there's that negative connotation with alcohol. So I was just talking about how beads has been adopted and it's embraced. People love it, and now it's become like a symbol of being native or a symbol of native art. And yeah, that's it. Oh, and it's part of a series called 99 Bottles of Beer on the Wall. So it also references that that folk song about counting with, it's a children's song, and I always thought it was strange to have this song dealing with drinking beer. That's it. Next slide. That's just another shot of it. So this was early in the project. This is where I had done 3 out of the 99. So far, I think I'm up to about 35. Yeah, and that's the detail. And that again is the headdress. This series, it's called White on the Inside, and it's based on a derogatory term where you call a native person an apple, where they're kind of like native on the outside but white on the inside. And I would be considered um, this because like I didn't grow up on my mother's side, so I didn't have the culture, I didn't have the teachings, and for me as an adult, I'm interested in this, and I'm playing catch up, as I go. So I'm like learning as I go. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you so much, Mike. And now, Kara, if you wouldn't mind sharing more about your practice with us. Here's another image from the installation of Larger Than Memory. You see the 3 photographs of Kara's that are in the exhibition, and in the foreground is an installation piece by Chinupa Hanska-Luger. So, Kara, take it away.
Hey, just let me fix my camera there for a second. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Kara Romero. Thank you for the beautiful introduction. Happy Indigenous Peoples Day. I'm calling in from Santa Fe, so the land of the Tiwa, Tewa, Toa, and Kara speaking people. And I feel so fortunate to be here in Santa Fe. You did a wonderful job with my bio at the beginning. And I guess just to expand on that a little bit before we go into the slides, I was raised early life on the reservation. I consider myself bicultural. I'm also biracial, and left the reservation at an early age and grew up in the suburbs of Houston and back summers on the reservation. So my dad is Native and my mom is white. And I think one of the things that really informs my practice and really launched me into this trajectory of becoming a photographer is that this experience of living on the reservation and within culture is so misunderstood and so invisible in dominant society. And having lived in the suburbs of Houston, it became very apparent at a very early age that people didn't understand what modern Native peoples were, what we look like, how we acted, our incredible diversity, how California Indians are different from Oklahoma Indians, are different from, our brothers and sisters to the north of the Medicine Line. And that really became something that I think we all lived with. I think so many of us live in both urban and res environments, and you'll hear a lot of us talk about living in both worlds or learning to traverse both worlds. Or I loved what Lewis said earlier about code switching. And, I think that it's a reality for all of us, around Thanksgiving celebration when I grew up and was mortified when all of the kids, began to pull out the colored turkey feathers and bang on oatmeal boxes as part of their Thanksgiving practice and their understanding of Native Americans. It just really led me to believe that there was a credible misrepresentation and misunderstanding of who we are as contemporary people. And in college, I was lucky enough to have my life changed by an incredible photography professor at the University of Houston. His name is Bill Thomas, and he cared less about technical ability and much more about content. And while I definitely lacked in technical ability at the beginning of my career, I had a lot to say. And that simple catalyst of being in class with a professor that showed me the power of photography as a visual way to communicate led me to run off to art school in Santa Fe. And I couldn't have made a better decision for self. That career went on. I did get another degree in photography technology. So I have formal training in film. So everything done in camera, and then also everything digital and commercial. And so I kind of work with both, I guess, formal trainings really behind my philosophy and technique and photography. So you'll see most everything done in camera, and then the use of photo illustration and digital to kind of take things into another world. Let's go ahead and start out with the first slide. So this series is Water Memories. It was a very well received series that I did in 2015. And this is a theme that you'll see appear throughout my body of work. And it really addresses the impacts of climate change on Indigenous people and how we suffer the effects of climate change in disproportionate ways, combined with historical flooding of our landscapes um, in the name of hydroelectric energy. So the theme really of environmental racism shows up, eco-apartheid in my work. A little bit about process. This was taken underwater in a swimming pool. Next slide. This one is called Last Indian Market, and I think it looks on my screen like a little portion of it might be cut off, but it is kind of a turning point, a pivot point in my career. It was so well received, I think the sense of humor, but for me also, it really established my voice in examining how we fit into the larger dominant culture. So in the beginning of my career, I feel like Native photography was really defined by the outside forces, like what is Native photography and what does Native photography look like. But for me, this piece really places us with a great understanding of the outside world and of dominant culture. And so instead of a view into our cultural privacy and documentation, which is a lot of what photography does. It really asserts our place in modern society and pop culture. Next slide. This series, along with the ones in the current exhibition, are from a series called Jackrabbit, Cottontail, and Spirits of the Desert. And the Chemehuevi people share the larger Mojave Desert with our sister tribes, including Lewis's tribe, the Cahuilla, the Serrano, the Chemehuevi, and Mojave peoples of Southern California. I was asked to create 6 billboards from Palm Springs to LA, of which this was one, as well as the ones in the current Larger Than Memory show appear. And they were a response to the landscape, a response to the political landscape from Indigenous perspective. And in short, these guys introduce our oral tradition, our mythos. So they're an embodiment of the mythos of our people. So time travelers, if you will, little spirit beings experiencing the changes in the landscape and most certainly the development of solar energy in California. Next slide. This one is another theme that pops up in my work. This one is called TV Indians, and it's very much about what I was talking about at the very beginning that got me interested in photography. So you'll see this is kind of a postmodern Curtis, and you'll see the juxtaposition of how we're represented in the media on the TVs in stark contrast to how we look. And how our cultural traditions are very much intact in real life, and how different those two things are side by side. Next slide. This one is called Coyote Tales #1, and here again, playfulness, introducing this idea of how our mythos manifests in modern times is something that I'm really interested in, and kind of throwing linear time away and addressing how these stories and our trickster character of Coyote really plays out in modern times. Next slide. And then the final 2 slides just kind of address a large body of my work where women, Native women, take center stage. And so they're very much a counter to photography of Native peoples and of Native women being traditionally dominated by white males, and the very subtle but very powerful shift of having a Native woman behind the camera. This one is from a series called First American Girls, and celebrates the diversity of our regalia, our bioregions, and the incredible attention to detail that we often don't receive when we're represented by outside peoples and culture. And then the final slide. This one is called Ka, and again introduces this idea of our mythos and how the spirit of our mythos is passed down to us through thousands of years. Um, Ka is a clay artist, and this is relating a story of Clay Woman who is subtle and inviting and warm to work with and found the world over. But when you go to fire her, no man or woman can ever master her. So that's kind of all wrapped up in this piece, which I've known for a body of Native figurative work, working with women to empower and uplift. And that's my introduction to myself and my work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kara. Now, if I can have both Mike and Lewis come back online, we'll just have a little bit of a dialogue between the four of us. And then at the end, we'll have time for a few questions. So again, if you have any questions for any of our panelists, please do enter them into the chat. And Allison will be moderating the Q&A at the end of our discussion. So again, thank you to all three of you for sharing more about your practice and about your backgrounds as artists. One thing I really wanted to know is about research. Some of you mentioned that research is a part of your practice, and how critical is that phase before you even start to physically create a work, that research phase?
I can answer that. A lot of times I just have a vision of what the piece will be, but it's like an outline, or you can kind of see like a figure. The piece that's in the show at the Herd right now, it sort of started out as a kind of like started out as a kachina, but it really needed to be more critical than that, and started looking at other models like tobacco Indians and things like that, and then found this whole sort of subgroup of these skookum dolls, and that to me had enough vague qualities of racism and a kind of latent respect that gets mixed up in a kind of humorous way that allowed me to do that. And then I just went ahead and started filling in all the details. Some of it's just from my life, but also a lot of it has to do with the history of how Native people were treated and how Native people are thought of in a kind of in a stereotypical way, and sort of putting them together to make something that's in a way half humorous and half horrible.
And I think that's an interesting thing to bring up, is this idea of these reductive readings or reductive representations of indigeneity by dominant culture, which you very much explore in your work, Kara, and you're wanting to create visibility for these communities that have been so misrepresented. In your series that's in the show of the photographs, can you go into a little bit more detail of that body of work?
Sure. And I think I can address the prior question too, because I think that one of the things for me that is part of the research, or maybe takes even a greater part of the research, is the collaborative process with the subjects and their families. And sometimes people call that free, prior, and informed consent. But as a Native photographer, I really continually, in my research portion, examine ways that I'm combating the exploitive nature of photography and Native peoples. And so there is a big collaborative that happens with myself and the subjects and their families as part of the research, and this idea that we're held to very strict cultural protocols. And And so those are always addressed in the work, which actually comes up in the Desert X series. I think the biggest, you know, it was such an incredible opportunity to be an Indigenous artist that was invited to participate in the Desert X Biennial. But we share those ancestral lands with many. And so the billboards were going to go up on the ancestral territory, really of the Cahuilla people, the Agua Caliente. The track of land that the billboards went up on was on Agua Caliente territory. So I actually wrote to their tribal council seeking permission to come in as one of their sister tribes. And I really needed to make sure that I felt that the content didn't add to the invisibility or the misunderstanding of California tribes, but instead brought more understanding and more good visibility. And so with that permission, I really brought those little boys as time traveling visitors to the lands of their sister tribes, which is something that has probably happened for thousands of years. Chemehuevi still travel to the land of the Cahuilla people and the Serrano, and conversely, they come to our lands to share songs and stories, some which are very similar and some which are different. I think that all in all, that experience was really wonderful. And this idea of creating incredibly accessible public art was also life-changing for me and for the families that were featured in the art. That was a really fun part of it, to bring celebrity to those little guys from the reservation.
Absolutely. And to speak a little bit about materiality, it came up in Lewis and your presentation, and Mike, you as well, especially when you were speaking about the work with the cigarettes sort of in the shape of a teepee. Can you talk about how materiality is either informed by the concept or vice versa?
Yeah, I felt like it's very important. I spend a lot of time just thinking before I'm even doing, is this the right material? What do I want to say? How do I say it? What's the best way? And that's what happened with the cigarettes.
And sort of to backtrack a little bit about research and this idea of when you're, concepting or ideating a new piece or body of work, a new series, how important is audience? Do you always have a specific audience in mind when you're creating work, or is it more open? And if so, how does that shift the way in which you create the work and the messaging or the semiotics that you embed in it? For anyone who wants to answer.
I can answer that a little bit. The audience a lot of times becomes is myself trying to see what the piece is, but also a lot of these pieces are collaborative works that have to do with the various people that help me make things, and the institutions that I might be making them for. So the Skookum was a commission piece, and started at the Heard Museum. So we had dialogue about what to do and various things that we could do in relationship to the exhibition and the goals of the exhibition. So the audience becomes everyone that I'm working with first, and then becomes the general public later. And I think that's been that differs from piece to piece. The truck I made completely in a vacuum, meaning that I just said, this is cool, I'm going to make a truck. And I get to work with cars, which I love to do anyway. So it was basically like I became a designer, and then I got involved with Magnolia Editions, who helped me do a lot of the weaving work. And then I learned a lot more about weaving and where I might be able to sort of cross over from doing traditional weaving to working with weavers in Europe, which is where that blanket was made and the upholstery was made. And you just learn a lot about the processes that way.
Speaking of process, Mike, when you first started working with beads, what was that process like? Was it challenging? Was it, you know, just you thought like, I'm going to do this bat and then maybe I'll never touch beadwork again? Um,
Yeah, it's funny how it came together because I was trying to remember what made me think that people could start that. And I was invited to a group exhibition called A Stake in the Ground. And I was literally thinking about a stick, and about territory and making your mark. And I don't know, I just thought of a baseball bat. And then I don't even know why, but I thought it was important, the relationship between the bat and violence and beating. So it's kind of just a simple wordplay. It happens often in my work where I have, like, behind me, it's an exit sign that says exist.
mhm,
So anyway, I had some help to, I hired a technician to help me figure out how do I beat around this object and how do I keep it from slipping. It was very, very challenging. Yeah, but it's so beautiful. I love the material. I love just even looking at it without even just the raw material sitting in a bowl.
mhm,
It's really dazzling. I love the colors, and it led to other projects using beadwork, and I think it's going to be something that's reoccurring.
mhm. Well, and speaking of things that are reoccurring, um, with the 99 bottles of beer on the wall, or even some of your photographic series like Coyote Tales, or the cars that you make, how much do you feel that there are elements of your practice that are sort of these ongoing projects that will never maybe be complete, but are just these sort of discursive conversations that happen in many parts?
Um, I think that that kind of ties into your last question for me also. My audience is definitely other natives. And I think I really take a look at my practice to be in service of my community. Are these stories important to tell? Are these going to uplift somebody when they see them? Is this going to make a difference in a kid's life or somebody in college that, like for me, I didn't see myself in museums. I didn't see like my autobiography, and I didn't feel like, I guess part of that makes you feel like, what are you as a Native person? So for me, I think it's a continual conversation with my Native peers about my identity and like seeking connection, because we're all so different. All of our tribes are so different, but really to me, where we're the same is in our struggles, right? And so, I can talk to all my friends about environmental racism and they're like, oh, let me tell you, or I can talk to all of my friends about misrepresentation in the media, or, um, you know, being treated in textbooks or media as bygone, or all of these things. So I think that those are always the conversations that I'm having with my peers. And so yeah, I suppose it's ongoing. um, and I imagine things will emerge as new too as I become more mature.
Mhm. Well, I'd love to hear what questions that the three of you have for each other. I think it's always so exciting to hear what artists want to know from, as you said, from their peers. So I'm going to mute my mic for a minute and let you just ask the questions that you really want to ask one another.
I have a question for Mike, and it's about the beating. You were talking about the whole sort of problem of, and this is all nuts and bolts, about getting at the let's say the beating to go around the bat and not slip off.
Mhm.
And so that's the question I ask myself: is how did you get it to not slip off the bat? That's the first thing I thought of when I saw it. Was that is there a matrix underneath it, or is it held under just tension?
It's just tension. Most of it is tension. But I cheated at the end. I siliconed the very end because it had a tendency to slip off the end of the bat. But it's a loose brick stitch. So it's just a loop, and in the back there's a spine about 6 or 7 beads that runs all the way down. And the first one actually had the one at the herd has a groove at the bottom to help it hold. That was the, and it's really difficult because to get the actual map of Canada to make it look like the parts, every time you tighten and do another row, it moves, and so it's like a really like a moving object as you're putting it together.
One of the things that I always like about sculpture is that the more appealing it is to me, the more I want to touch it.
Mm.
And the more I want to touch it, the more dangerous that seems to do. So that's one of the things I kind of get when I see the bats in particular, is that I really want to touch it, and I know that I would destroy it by doing that. I think a lot of people, I've done other inflatables, and all children want to push on it or jump on it or, use it as a bouncy house, which it really wouldn't destroy it, but it's sort of like, I'm sure, a museum worst nightmare is having children throw themselves on sculptures. But I've seen it happen.
What made you decide to make it an inflatable and not another type of sculpture like wood or?
Well, one of the things is that the skookum itself, when you look at the way they're made, it's just like a dried apple, and then just like a sock filled with, you know, with more material in it. It's like really junky, and the inflatable itself is, to me, is kind of cheap looking. And I've always wanted to be like the gorilla on top of a car dealership. So that fulfills that kind of fantasy for me. But it's also it just links to things that to me are not as heavy as, let's say, carved wood or bronze. The motor has to stay going, blowing the air into it. Otherwise, it just falls in on itself. So it's kind of it's a weak thing in a way, and I think that to me, identity is kind of weak. It's not some sort of bedrock thing that we all experience, but every day we have to kind of build ourselves up again, and we have to kind of keep the effort into being who we are. Otherwise, it all just sort of turns into a big pile on the floor. So that's sort of where that comes from.
Yeah, it's like, how do we stay native in this contemporary world?
Yeah, you have to put all this effort into it, and then you're not. For me, particularly the way I grew up, is like, am I putting the right effort in the right place, or if I just making a fool of myself? Um, does it help other people understand who I am, or is it just create a kind of fissure between myself and other Native folks? To me, it's like a problematic object, but I feel like a problematic person in a way. I'm sort of stuck in between dimensions in a kind of science fiction way.
I felt like the inflatable sculpture brought just this instant sense of humor to the piece, too, where we could really just laugh at ourselves, while we laughed at your sculpture. It was a lot of fun to experience, and my family and I kept going back at it and, wondering, like, did you sew this thing yourself? Did you, have a custom maker make it for you? I would love to see the original drawings of yourself. All of it.
I kind of took some photographs of myself and then mixed it together with various other kinds of dolls. But then I worked with a friend of mine, and we did a 3D model, so we could spin it around. And then I took it to basically an inflatable company that does mascots and bouncy houses and all that kind of stuff in San Diego. And then they took my 3D model and they made a pattern, and then they would like show it to me from various times. But also I went in that day where the guy painted my face. So I was there, and he's like looking at my face and he's painting it in. That was pretty wild. There was a kind of humor in making it at the same time that that you know everybody who's working on it's kind of having a good time. So that's interesting.
Well, at this point, do we have any questions from our viewers, Allison, for our panelists? And thank you so much to all three of you again for sharing so much of your practice with us. It's really, really wonderful. And the comments we're getting in the chat are just really effusive with how much people are enjoying hearing you all speak.
I have a question for Kara, though. Is that all right if I
Oh,
ask?
of course. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I'm
Of course.
sorry. I'm sorry. I was looking at your work and particularly the panoramic feature of your work, and I'm wondering, are you stitching together images, or are you taking one single frame, or is it a number of frames that you've sort of pieced together to make this panorama?
Yeah, so I pieced them together and I went into that project knowing that they were for the billboard format. And that was the choice that I had as far as perspective. And I'm one of those people that when I work with people, I'm like, if it's not good enough, you're not close enough. And so I knew that I wanted to stitch the 3 frames together. And luckily I've been doing panoramics even since silver gelatin days and stitching the silver gelatins together. So for me, it was a very comfortable way um, to format them. But each one of those are 3 images stitched together. So the foreground or this, you know, the main subject matter, and then more environment added with the intention before we went to the shoot. Cool.
That answers a lot.
All right, well, now is the time if you have a question to go ahead and submit that. I do have a few that we'll ask. And the first one I have is for Lewis. Mickey would like to know a little bit more about that Skookum doll. You know, I think we're all very enamored with it. And, you know, she wanted to know Skookum dolls originally, who created them and what does Skookum mean?
Skookum is a reference to good luck. It's from the Pacific Northwest. So it was sort of created as a good luck charm, although they don't look very lucky. If you look at them, they look kind of sad and shifty-eyed. And right now, because I have a little bit of stage fright, I'm forgetting the name of the woman who created them. And
I think it was
Aaron
Mary
might remember.
McCabe. Yeah, I think her name was Mary Dower McCabe, and she lived in Missoula, Montana.
So thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so she created these as sort of like a hobby, and then they became original ones are worth a lot on the antique market, but then a lot of them were just copied, and it was a way to like make things at home and then sell them to make extra money, particularly during the Depression. But I still find, and Mike sort of mentioned this about the apples, that the heads were actually apples that were carved by a white person of an Indian. So it kind of turns them into, I don't know, it just mixes the metaphors up so well that I find a lot of amusement in that.
It's funny too, my girlfriend's from Central America, and they're called coconuts. So if you're white on the inside and brown on the other, so.
Wow.
For Kara, I have kind of 3 related questions. Joanne wants to know where you can actually view the images of the Billboard project, if they're kind of still up. Carolyn also asked if you said you did 5 billboards, so obviously do you have photos of them presented all at once? And then the final question is, how have the youth in the Spirit Billboard responded to their visibility now?
One place that you can go see a film documentary about them is if you search in YouTube PBS Craft in America. They did a short section on the Desert X billboard series. They're called Jack Rabbit Cottontail and Spirits of the Desert. So you can probably Google any combination of the series or my name or PBS, and they actually show what the billboards look like from the street view from the highway. And then just on my website, you can see the images themselves. 3 of them are in the Larger Than Memory show. So if you haven't gotten to see that in person, that's one way to view them small. And then the process of making them really big was very interesting. They're actually really low resolution prints on vinyl is how billboards work. So I was shocked. That was part of the process that shocked me, because I photograph it, super high resolution, so that the photographs, when you see them like in the herd, are very lifelike, with a lot of detail. But I guess the way it works from viewing them far away is your eyes just want to put all of those pixels back together. So the in-person vinyl belongs to the city of Santa Monica now. They acquired them for their Indigenous Now events after the billboards came down. And I hope that answered your question about where you can view them.
And how the youth responded to their visibility,
So that's an ongoing. I've continued to work with the 4 boys. I am essentially their auntie on our reservation, so there's lots more images that came out after the series. I've been working with them for another 1.5 years now. They've enjoyed it quite a bit. The images have gone up into our casino there on the reservation. They've been published in books in Tucson. They went out to see the billboards and themselves. Kiani made it into an issue of Vogue. So you can imagine, from this like incredibly marginalized community, Kiani tells his cousins that I'm the most famous out of all of you, which is just super cute. They're so incredible to work with, and I hope that they just remember this time in their youth, and I'll probably photograph them for the rest of their lives. And that's kind of the way it is from the reservation, is we know each other our entire lifespan. So hopefully everybody gets to see who they are and what they're like, which is they're absolutely wonderful boys throughout their lives.
All right, I have one more question from our members, and that's from Vilma. This is from Mike, and she just wants to know, you talked a little bit about the process of actually putting the beads on, but was there any math involved in making sure the map of Canada was wrapped around the bat just right?
Yeah, I downloaded a computer program that was able to import the image, and then it would, divide it up based on my pattern. And I used that as a starting point. But as I was working with it, it became less and less useful. I felt like I was just using the reference image the most than that. But it was a good point to just to pixelate it out into a map. But because the bat is a changing shape, it was, you really just had to go by eye.
Well, thank you so much to all 3 of you. And I guess my final question is there anything that any of you want to leave our audience with that hasn't already been shared this evening? The crickets are now playing in the background.
Come see the show.
Yes, come see the show.
I can be there.
I know. Well, we're so sorry that the circumstances are what they are, that not everybody could be here in person. But again, we appreciate so much the 3 of you joining us. Allison, thank you, and Megan Coleman for helping organize this on the back end. Zoom is definitely an ever-evolving process that we're all learning how to use more efficiently. And thank you so much for everybody tuning in. We really appreciate your support. Everyone have a lovely evening.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.